So, what if I told you there are 12 towns in Australia where the land itself has basically given up on you? Not haunted house creepy, not jump scare creepy. I'm talking about the kind of creepy where you pull up in your car and something in your gut just says, turn around. We're talking abandoned mines, asbestos dust floating through the air, and streets so empty you'd swear the whole population just vanished overnight. And some of them literally did. We're going through all 12 today, and by the end, you're going to see Australia very differently. Number 1. Monte Cristo, New South Wales. Picture this, a white 2-story homestead sitting on a hill above a tiny NS West town, and every single person who ever lived or worked there has a story that ends badly. Not metaphorically, like actually, genuinely badly. Monte Cristo is near Junee, and yeah, you've probably heard of it because of the ghost tours. But forget that for a second, because the real history here is so dense with tragedy that the ghost stuff almost feels like a bonus. A caretaker burned to death on the property. A stable boy fell from a balcony. A mentally ill man was chained in a room for years. That's not one bad thing happening in a place. That's a pattern. And patterns mean something. But here's what nobody tells you. The current owners actually live there, like full time. They sleep there. They run it as a tourist attraction, sure, but at the end of the day, when the visitors leave, they're just in that house, on that hill. I don't know what to call that except deeply, deeply committed to a choice. And the town of Junee itself doesn't help. It runs colder than the surrounding areas for no obvious reason. There's a decommissioned prison nearby. Locals will casually drop the fact that the old hospital had an autopsy room like they're telling you about a good cafe. Just normal conversation, totally fine. Psychologists who study place memory say that spaces with repeated trauma can trigger a kind of environmental anxiety. Your brain picks up that something is wrong before you can even name it. Monte Cristo is basically their #1 case study walking around in homestead form. And because Junee is so isolated, there's nothing to drown that feeling out. No traffic, no noise. Just the house, the hill, and the silence doing whatever it wants to your head. Number 2. Port Arthur, Tasmania. So here's a question. What do you do with a place where over 1,000 people are buried, where convicts were tortured so badly that some of them begged to be hanged just to escape it, and where in 1996 a gunman killed 35 people? You turn it into a tourist attraction, obviously. And look, on paper that makes sense. Port Arthur is genuinely significant history. It's Tasmania's most visited historic site. But there's a gap between knowing that in your head and actually standing in those ruins at night on one of their ghost tours. And that gap is where your nerve endings live. Multiple visitors have described the After Dark tours as the moment Port Arthur stops being a history lesson and becomes something you can't shake. Someone on Reddit wrote that they flat out ran back to the bus after seeing something near the solitary confinement cells. They didn't say what, they just left it there. And somehow, that's so much worse than if they'd explained it. Here's the thing about those solitary confinement cells. The system used there was called the model prison. The idea was that silence and isolation would reform criminals. Prisoners wore hoods in common areas so they couldn't see each other. They got numbers instead of names. The whole point was to break a person's sense of self completely, and it worked. Just not in the way anyone intended. We now know from neuroscience research that extended isolation causes hallucinations, paranoia, and permanent psychological damage within days. Port Arthur wasn't a prison with a tough reputation. By today's standards, it was a straight-up torture facility dressed up as reform. And then, on top of all that colonial horror, you've got the 1996 massacre. One patch of Tasmanian coastline. 2 completely separate categories of mass trauma. Nearly 200 years of suffering soaked into the same ground. Number 3. Walhalla. Victoria Walhalla had 3,000 people living in it at its peak. Today, it has around 20. Not 20,000, 20. And the town didn't burn down, didn't flood, didn't get wiped out by anything. It just emptied out. Like someone pulled a plug and everyone quietly drained away. The town sits deep in the Victorian mountains, tucked into a valley so narrow that the sun only hits the main street for a few hours a day. During the gold rush, it was one of the richest towns in Australia per capita. The mine pulled over 75 tons of gold out of the ground. 75 tons. And then the gold ran out, and people left so fast they basically left the town standing mid-sentence. And that's the thing, it's all still there. The old general store, the post office, the buildings just sitting there, like everyone stepped out and forgot to come back. Walking through Walhalla doesn't feel like visiting history. It feels like stumbling onto a film set where the actors went to lunch and just never returned. But here's what nobody tells you about Walhalla: the cemetery. It's massive. Disproportionately, almost offensively massive for a town this size. Because the gold rush chewed through workers, accidents, disease, the general brutality of 1800s mining life. So you've got this enormous hillside packed with graves, and then 20 living people rattling around in the valley below it. Let that sink in. Urban planners actually have a term for this: population shadow. It's when the buildings outlast the reason the buildings existed in the first place. Walhalla is basically the textbook photo for that concept. Number 4, Araltunga, Northern Territory. Imagine finding gold in the middle of the Australian desert, 600 kilometers from the nearest supply town, with no water, no roads, and summer temperatures that regularly hit 45 degrees. Now, imagine 1,200 people looking at all of that and going, "Yeah, sounds good." That's Araltunga. And honestly, that decision alone tells you everything about what gold does to people's brains. Araltunga was the Northern Territory's first town, a gold rush settlement that popped up in the 1890s in the East McDonnell Ranges. Getting there meant weeks of travel through some of the most hostile terrain on the continent. Supplies ran out constantly. People literally died of thirst getting there. And still, they came. What's left now is a historical reserve, basically ruins and old stone buildings sitting in the red dirt, with little information signs explaining what each crumbling structure used to be. There's a police lockup, a government battery for processing ore, a handful of old homesteads getting slowly swallowed by the desert, and a cemetery, because of course there is. Most of the graves are unmarked, or weathered so badly you can't read them, which is somehow so much worse than a cemetery with names. At least names mean someone was counted. But here's what nobody tells you. The heat out there isn't just uncomfortable, it feels personal. And that's not just me being dramatic. Research on extreme heat environments shows that heat stress hits your brain before it hits your body. Early symptoms include confusion, irritability, and a creeping sense of dread. So that feeling of being watched, that low hum of wrongness you get standing in those ruins, part of that might literally be the temperature messing with your nervous system. And there are 0 services at Araltunga. No fuel, no food, no phone signal. The road in from Alice Springs is unsealed. If something goes wrong out there, the desert is not going to care even a little bit. The land won this place back. It always does out here. Number 5, Cook, South Australia. Cook, South Australia. Population 4. Not a typo, not a rounding error. 4 actual humans living in a town that was built for hundreds. And here's the kicker. The town is all still there. The houses, the hospital, the school, the swimming pool, just sitting there, empty, in the dead middle of the Nullarbor Plain. Cook exists because of the Trans-Australian Railway. The railway needed maintenance workers, the workers needed somewhere to live, so they built an entire town from scratch. Proper streets, real infrastructure, families, kids, a community, a whole life out there in one of the most remote places on Earth. Then diesel locomotives came along, the maintenance requirements dropped, and the workers left, just like that. But here's what nobody tells you. This isn't ruins we're talking about. The hospital still has equipment in it. The houses still have furniture inside. It's like everyone just got up mid-Tuesday and walked out. It's the world's most depressing open home inspection, and nobody is buying. The Nullarbor surrounding Cook is one of the flattest places on the entire planet. You can see 50 kilometers in every direction, and there is nothing. No hills, no trees, just flat scrub going all the way to the horizon, and then more flat scrub after that. The isolation isn't a vibe, it's a measurement. You are mathematically, provably, in the middle of nowhere, and your brain genuinely can't handle it. Research on extreme isolation shows that when there are no visual landmarks, your sense of scale just breaks down. Distances stop making sense. The nullarbor doesn't just feel endless, your brain literally cannot calibrate it properly. You're not being dramatic, you're just malfunctioning slightly. The Indian Pacific train stops at Cook for about 40 minutes. Passengers get off, walk through the empty streets, peer through the hospital windows, and climb back on the train. And the 4 people who live there just watch that happen and go back to their day. Number 6. Wittenoom, Western Australia. There is a town in Western Australia that the government officially removed from maps. Not just closed down, removed. You cannot find it on official WA road maps anymore. They straight up delisted it. And the reason why makes everything else on this list feel like a minor inconvenience. Wittenoom was a blue asbestos mining town in the Pilbara. At its peak, around 2,000 people lived there. Normal town, normal life. Then the mine closed in 1966 and things got dark fast because the asbestos didn't leave when the miners did. The waste material from processing, called tailings, got used to surface the roads, fill the playgrounds, and build up gardens. The entire town is contaminated, every single bit of it. Over 2,000 former residents and workers have died from mesothelioma, the cancer you get from asbestos exposure. And for years, even after the government declared the whole place a health hazard, a handful of people just refused to leave. They stayed in the contaminated houses, on the contaminated streets, breathing the contaminated air. The government spent decades trying to get them out. Here's what makes it genuinely terrifying, though. You can't see asbestos fibers, can't smell them, can't feel them, they just float. And the gorge nearby, which is honestly one of the most beautiful spots in all of WA, has contaminated dust that stirs up every time the wind picks up or a car rolls through. The government put up signs telling people not to stop. Some stop anyway, and mesothelioma has a latency period of 20 to 50 years. So you could visit today and not find out for decades. You can't outrun it, you won't see it coming. Let that sink in. The last residents are gone now. The power is cut. The buildings are still there, slowly falling apart in the Pilbara heat, and the dust is still drifting around in the gorge, beautiful and invisible and deadly. Number 7. Hill End, New South Wales. In 1872, Hill End was the largest inland town in Australia. Not just big for a country town, bigger than Bathurst, bigger than most cities. It had 8,000 people, 52 hotels, and more gold moving through it than almost anywhere else on the continent. Today, it has about 100 people. 100. And the town is still standing. That's the part that gets you. Hill End didn't burn down. The buildings are still there. The Royal Hotel, the hospital ruins, the old stores, all of it just sitting in the central tablelands of New South Wales, heritage listed, frozen mid-collapse by government order. You're not looking at rubble. You're looking at a town that's been legally pinned in place like a bug in a display case. But here's what nobody tells you. Walking around a town built for 8,000 people when only 100 are left is a genuinely weird experience. The streets are wide, like really wide, built for foot traffic and carts and the kind of chaos that comes with 8,000 people all needing somewhere to be. And now there's just nothing moving. Your brain keeps doing the math and the math keeps coming up wrong. And here's the kicker. In 1872, right at the peak, a nugget was found nearby that weighed over 280 kilograms. The Holterman nugget, still the largest single mass of gold ever found anywhere in the world. Ever. And within a few years of that discovery, the easy gold was gone, and so were the people. The biggest gold find in history, and it still couldn't hold the town together. Historians call it extraction amnesia, when a town's whole identity is tied to one resource, and when that resource goes, the town has nothing left to be. Hill End existed for gold. Gold left, town left. The ruins aren't a sign of failure. They're what total success followed by total collapse actually looks like. And if you thought 100 people in a town built for 8,000 was wild, the next place makes Hill End look like peak hour in the CBD. Number 8. Silverton, New South Wales. Mad Max was filmed here. Not as a metaphor, not as a vibe comparison. The actual Mad Max movies used Silverton as a backdrop because it looked post-apocalyptic enough to stand in for the end of the world. Let that sink in. A film crew looked at this place and said, yeah, this is what civilization looks like after it collapses. And the locals were fine with that. Silverton sits about 25 kilometers from Broken Hill in outback New South Wales. At its peak, it had around 3,000 people riding a silver mining boom in the 1880s. The silver ran out fast. Within a decade, most people had packed up and moved to Broken Hill, and Silverton has been slowly drying out in the desert ever since. About 50 people live there now. But here's what nobody tells you. Silverton knows exactly what it is. It leans into the ghost town thing hard. There's a pub, some art galleries, quirky sculptures sitting out in the dirt. The whole place is kind of self-aware about its own emptiness. And that creates this weird layer where you genuinely can't tell if what you're feeling is real or performed. Somehow that makes it so much creepier than if it just looked abandoned. The landscape does something to you out there. Red dirt, sparse scrub, a horizon that just goes and goes, and a silence so thick your own heartbeat starts to feel loud. The light is wrong too. Too bright, too flat, no depth to it. You'll look at something and genuinely not be able to tell if it's 200 meters away or 2 kilometers. Researchers actually have a name for what happens to people in extreme arid environments like this: desert syndrome. And it includes perceptual distortions and a persistent feeling of being watched. Your nervous system is not okay out there. Number 9. Central Tilba, New South Wales. Okay, so Central Tilba looks like a postcard. Like, genuinely. Tiny heritage village on the New South Wales south coast, old wooden buildings, a cheese factory, craft shops, mountain backdrop. It is objectively charming. So why is it on this list? Because sometimes the creepiest thing is a place that's trying just a little too hard to look like nothing is wrong. The whole town is heritage listed, which sounds nice until you realize what that actually means. Central Tilba is legally required to look exactly like it does. Every building, every shopfront, every detail frozen in place by government order. It looks exactly like it did 130 years ago. Not because it naturally stayed that way, because it literally cannot change. And that's the thing. There's a real difference between a place that preserved itself and a place that is legally prevented from moving on. Central Tilba is pinned in 1890 like a butterfly in a case. You spend enough time walking those streets and you start to feel the pressure of that. The town is performing its own past all day, every day for visitors, and it never breaks character, not once. The surrounding area adds another layer. The Tilba region has a long history of tight-knit, insular little communities. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone knows your business, and a stranger pulling into town gets noticed immediately. You feel that too. Sociologists who study heritage tourism say that towns preserved entirely for their looks often develop a weird identity crisis. The residents are basically living inside a museum. The gap between real daily life and the performance of history creates a social stress that visitors pick up on without being able to explain it. They actually call it living museum syndrome. There's a Reddit thread about Tyalgum, a similar heritage village up in northern New South Wales, where someone described walking into a cafe staffed entirely by more than 20 young European women in a town with absolutely no visible reason for them to be there. That thread went places. And once you read it, every cute little heritage village starts hitting different. Number 10. Beaconsfield, Tasmania. In 2006, a gold mine collapsed in Beaconsfield, Tasmania, and trapped 2 miners underground for 2 weeks. The whole country watched. It was wall-to-wall news coverage, the kind where you come home and your parents are already watching it and nobody changes the channel. And when the miners finally came out alive, everyone exhaled and moved on. Except Beaconsfield didn't really get to move on. Here's the thing, that mine had been running in various forms since the 1870s. The whole town built itself around it. The economy, the identity, the reason anyone was there at all. When the mine closed for good after the collapse, Beaconsfield lost its reason to exist. Same story as half the towns on this list, except this one did it with every TV camera in Australia pointed straight at it. And the aftermath is what gets you. The mine is a museum now. The town reframed the whole collapse as a survival story, a resilience story, and look, it genuinely is that. 2 men came out alive from 14 days underground. That's remarkable. But it's also a story about a community that watched its economic foundation literally crumble while those men were still inside it. Both things are true at the same time, and the town has to carry both of them every single day. The Tamar Valley around Beaconsfield is beautiful, by the way. Vineyards, river views, rolling hills. But the mine infrastructure is right there in the middle of town, and you cannot look at it without your brain going straight back to 2006. The museum tells the story well, but standing next to the actual shaft where those men were trapped for 14 days is a specific kind of heavy that no amount of good signage can fix. Trauma researchers call it collective trauma, a shared wound that rewires how a whole community sees itself. Beaconsfield's version of that is unusually well documented because it happened live in front of the entire country. Tasmania just keeps doing this. More dark history per square kilometer than almost anywhere else in Australia, and they just keep building museums about it. Number 11, Eurandary, New South Wales. Eurandary is a private town. Not private like a gated community. Private like one family owns the entire thing. The buildings, the streets, the history, all of it. And you can actually stay there, which sounds like a fun, quirky weekend, until you really think about what it means to sleep in a ghost town that someone owns. It sits about 140 kilometers west of Sydney in the Blue Mountains wilderness. But don't let that fool you into thinking it's an easy drive. You're getting there via a rough 4-wheel drive track or a small plane. That's it. Those are your 2 options. It was a silver mining town that peaked in the early 1900s and was mostly abandoned by the 1920s. And then in the 1970s, a family bought the whole thing and has been keeping it alive ever since. And they let you stay there. You can book a night in a 100-year-old miner's cottage with no mobile reception, no neighbors for kilometers, and the nearest help being that same 4-wheel drive track you absolutely should not attempt in the dark. Sounds like a great Airbnb listing, right? The surrounding park is genuinely stunning. Sandstone ridges, dense bush, Wallandilly River country, beautiful in daylight. But when the sun goes down out there, it goes down completely. No streetlights, no other buildings, just dark. And here's what research on remote wilderness stays actually shows. Even people who are totally fine with being alone get hit with real anxiety in that 2 to 3 hour window after sunset in genuinely dark environments. Your ancient brain decides something is hunting you. It's an evolutionary thing. You can't logic your way out of it. Number 12, Bodie, Western Australia. Bodie, Western Australia. No famous disaster, no government cover-up, no ghost tour. Just a town sitting inside a Kerry forest in the Pemberton region of WA, and the feeling that the place does not want you there. The Kerry trees around Pemberton are some of the tallest in the world. We're talking 60 meters straight up, so high they basically eat the sky. The forest absorbs sound in a way that feels wrong. You'll stop walking and there's just nothing. No echo, no bounce. Like the trees swallowed it. Navigation gets weird in there too. The light comes in at strange angles, and the density of the trees means your sense of direction gets unreliable fast. But here's what nobody tells you. There's an area near Pemberton called Goblin Swamp, where locals consistently describe seeing faces in the trees. Not as a metaphor, actual faces, formed by the bark and moss patterns on the Kerry trunks. Multiple people, no connection to each other, same description every time. And there's a strong local tradition of not photographing it or sharing images. Make of that what you will. So there's a scientific explanation for it. It's called pareidolia, your brain's face detection system finding human shapes in random patterns. And knowing that does exactly nothing when you're standing in a Kerry forest at dusk, with the light cutting through low and 60 meters of tree above your head. Here's the thing about that face detection system. Neuroscience research shows it moves faster than conscious thought. You see the face before your brain can decide not to. And in a dense forest with that much visual noise, it fires constantly, non-stop, the whole time you're in there. The forest isn't haunted. Your brain just will not stop populating it with watching faces, and there is no off switch.